1935, the loudest shot in the history of the DuPont clan was fired. It came from the grave. Nearly all of Alfred DuPont's fortune, $40 million, didn't go to his family. It went to establish a children's hospital. This was not an act of generosity. It was a brilliant act of revenge. He had permanently humiliated his enemies, those who had exiled him from his own empire, those who had struck him down at his moment of greatest triumph, at the gates of his personal Versailles. But the most incredible thing is that this palace, built to spite his family, and this hospital, created to humiliate them, both exist to this day. And now, imagine this, they stand side by side. So how did an architectural monument to the most venomous family feud in America become a source of healing for thousands of children? And the main question, does a poisonous root devalue the beautiful flower that grows from it? This is Nemours. At first glance, it is the embodiment of harmony, a dream of French aristocracy on American soil, frozen in stone. Immaculate gardens, bathed in the morning sun. Perfect lines that draw the eye to the elegant facade of the palace. It seems this place could only have been built from love. But that is an illusion. This paradise was born in the hell of a family war. It is a palace built on resentment, a temple erected out of revenge. Every column here is an argument and a dispute. Every acre of land is territory conquered from enemies who bore the same last name. The man who created this splendor was not seeking peace. He was seeking to prove his superiority. And today, by the cruelest irony of fate that history could ever devise, something unimaginable is happening. Just a few steps from this monument to enmity, in corridors built with the same money, children's voices echo. Here, in one of the most advanced pediatric hospitals in the country, doctors are fighting a very different war, a war for life. High-tech equipment, the most complex surgeries, years of research. All of it exists thanks to the will of the very same man who built himself a palace in defiance of the world. This fortress of personal pride now funds healing. Every perfectly trimmed bush, every fountain shooting towards the sky, their maintenance is paid for by dividends from a fortune created to humiliate opponents. Here, at Nemours, children are treated from all over the country, perhaps even the descendants of the very relatives its creator so desperately hated. He wanted these walls to scream of his triumph. He could never have imagined that one day they would whisper of mercy. He built a monument to his ego, and time transformed it into a monument to humanity. So how did this happen? How did the most grandiose architectural insult in the history of the American aristocracy become its most magnanimous legacy? Does a poisonous root devalue the beautiful flower that grows from it? To understand, we must go back to the beginning, to the smell of gunpowder and the taste of betrayal. Before marble can appear, there must be an explosion. Before a gardener can trim a perfect hedge, someone must produce the gunpowder that will wipe entire villages off the face of the earth. Such is the law of capital on which Nemours was built, the name DuPont. To many, it sounds like a synonym for old American aristocracy, but its true sound is the roar of cannonade. Since 1802, this family had been the main supplier to the American military, turning chemical formulas into military might. They were the blacksmiths of the nation, whose hammers forged not plowshares, but weapons. But by the turn of the 20th century, the old guard had grown tired. The empire had ossified. And then, a new generation took the stage. Young, audacious, ruthless. In 1902, Alfred DuPont and two of his cousins did the unthinkable. They bought the entire colossal company from their uncles and grandfathers without spending a single cent of their own money. They simply issued stock in a new company they themselves had created and used it to pay for the old one. This wasn't business. It was a financial blitzkrieg, brilliant and cynical. They seized control of the nation's main arsenal, using its own assets as the weapon. But the real deluge of gold came later. In 1914, Europe set itself on fire. For millions, it was a catastrophe. For the DuPont Company, it was the best deal in its history. While men died in the fields of Flanders and at Verdun, the factory smokestacks in Delaware billowed around the clock. Over the 4 years of the war, the company supplied the Allies with 1.5 billion pounds of smokeless powder. 1.5 billion. Their annual profit soared from $5 million to 58. Every shell that exploded in the trenches was a check written out to the DuPonts. Every burst of machine gun fire was the clink of coins falling into their safes. This money, smelling of cordite and death, would become the foundation for Nemours and other luxurious palaces of America. It was blood money, and no one hid it. The wealth was so vast it seemed it could buy anything: power, status, immortality. But it could not buy loyalty. The money earned from a world war would now ignite a family war, and the main weapon in it would not be gunpowder, but stone and marble. War doesn't end with the last shot. Sometimes it just changes the battlefield. Instead of trenches, you have living rooms. Instead of cannons, porcelain and silk. And instead of explosives, you have gossip, the most destructive weapon of high society. And on this new battlefield, Alfred Dupont, the master of gunpowder, was suffering a crushing defeat. He had done the unthinkable. In 1906, he divorced his cousin, which was a scandal in itself, and then he detonated the foundations of his own clan by marrying another cousin, Alicia Bradford, who was also divorced. For the puritanical DuPont dynasty, this was tantamount to treason. Doors closed. Invitations stopped arriving. Alfred and his new wife became ghosts at family gatherings, spoken of but never seen. He had become an outcast. And so he responded. When you are denied a voice at the family table, you make the stone speak. His revenge would not be spoken, but built. He would erect for his disgraced queen a palace so grand, so defiantly beautiful, that its shadow would fall upon all the estates of his enemies and cause them to fade. The choice of name was the first shot. Nemours, the town in France where their family originated. By naming his home this, he wasn't just paying homage to the past. He was staking his claim to the legacy. He was shouting without words, I am the true DuPont. My branch is the main one. You can take the company from me, but you cannot take my name. Then came the choice of architects. The firm Carrere and Hastings. These were the rock stars of American architecture, who built for the Vanderbilts and the Fricks. To hire them wasn't just to commission a design. It was to buy a place in the pantheon. It was a signal. I am in the same league as New York's old money, and I am head and shoulders above you provincial industrialists from Delaware. But the most venomous sting was in the style. He didn't just order a mansion. He ordered a copy of the Petit Trianon, Marie Antoinette's personal palace at Versailles. This was a message of incredible audacity. He wasn't just building in the European spirit, as all wealthy Americans did. He was importing the very essence of the French monarchy. He was telling his family, while you build big American houses, I am building myself a little Versailles. We are on different levels. From the very first blueprint, Nemours was not a home. It was a weapon, a meticulously designed, fabulously expensive machine for humiliation. Every stone in its wall was paid for not only with money from the sale of gunpowder, but with the poison of personal resentment. He had chosen the architects, he had chosen the style, he had chosen the name, he had declared war. But to build his Versailles, he would have to fight more than just his family. First, he had to conquer the American land itself. To build a French palace, you need French soil. At least that's the common belief. But Alfred du Pont did not have French soil. He had a nondescript, swampy plot of land in the state of Delaware. Flat, damp, stubborn. A landscape that inspired not sonnets, but the digging of drainage ditches. The nature of Delaware was not going to become Versailles without a fight. The war with nature began. It was a titanic, almost mad task. To take a flat, unremarkable landscape and, by force, compel it to assume the aristocratic topography of Versailles. An army took to this battlefield. Hundreds of workers, mostly immigrants from Italy and Ireland, whose names have been lost to history. They were the infantry in DuPont's personal war against geology. Their weapons were steam, steel, and muscle. Huge steam shovels, resembling prehistoric monsters, bit into the earth, exhaling clouds of black smoke. Endless lines of horses pulled creaking carts, moving thousands of tons of soil from one end of the property to the other. It was a symphony of chaos, conducted by a single, unbending will. Hills were leveled, ravines were filled, swamps were drained. This wasn't construction. It was altering the landscape on a planetary scale. Underground, hidden from view, miles of pipes were laid, the subterranean arteries of the future gardens, destined to drink water on a schedule set by man. And above it all, like a general, stood Alfred himself. An engineer to the core, he didn't trust the architect's blueprints as much as he trusted his own calculations. He stood amidst the mud and noise, almost deaf, but seeing everything. He didn't issue orders from a clean office. He personally checked the slopes, controlled the composition of the soil, and inspected the drainage systems. He saw the world as a set of imperfect materials that his will and his money were meant to bring into perfect order. And this land was just another, most stubborn material. Every cubic meter of displaced earth was paid for with profits from explosives. The destructive power of capital was transformed into a creative force, but one no less violent. He subjugated the American land, forcing it to pretend it was France. He sculpted from it a stage for his future triumph. But to build a true palace, will and clay are not enough. You need marble, you need tapestries, you need artifacts of the old world that cannot be created, only bought. His army of engineers had defeated nature. Now, his army of agents, with wallets stuffed with gunpowder money, would set out to conquer Europe. A palace is not just walls. It is a collection of stories, stolen from time and bought with money. While hundreds of workers were churning mud in Delaware, on the other side of the Atlantic, another of Alfred Dupont's armies was at work. An army without uniforms, armed with checkbooks. Its mission, to plunder old Europe to adorn the new America. For these men, the world turned into a giant catalog. Their agents scoured Paris and London, the castles of the Loire Valley, and Italian palazzos. They hunted for the souls of dying aristocratic houses. An 18th century antique fireplace from a bankrupt chateau? Purchased. A tapestry that had seen Louis XIV? Wrap it up. They bought history wholesale for a palace that didn't even have a roof yet. Every acquired item was not just a piece of decor. It was a captured relic, a trophy proving that money earned from explosives could buy the nobility that was not passed down by blood. Then began a logistical nightmare, transformed into a triumph of capital. The graphics on the screen come to life, showing routes that crisscross the globe. From the quarries of Carrara, where Michelangelo himself once sourced his marble, ships laden with giant white blocks set off across the ocean. This marble, meant for statues and cathedrals, was now to become the floor of an American mansion. From Vermont, with its famous quarries, trains carried thousands of slabs of dark gray slate to cover the roof of Nemours. From Indiana, wagons of limestone for the facade. The railroads and steamship lines, those blood vessels of the industrial age, now worked toward a single goal: to deliver a piece of the world to one specific corner of Delaware. It was a demonstration of the absolute power of money. Geography lost its meaning. Distances vanished. The world was no longer a collection of countries and cultures. It had become a global market of raw materials for the construction of one man's personal fortress. Italian marble, French tapestries, American slate, all were mixed in a single melting pot, controlled by the will of Alfred Pont. He wasn't just building a house. He was assembling a world for himself, piece by piece. He ordered himself a past, the way one orders furniture from a catalog. And while the ships and trains brought him the material proof of his power, in his home state, just a few miles from the construction site, another battle was unfolding. A battle in which something more than marble and tapestries was at stake. The DuPont empire itself was at stake. History is rarely neat. It doesn't wait for one battle to end before starting another. For Alfred DuPont, the war was being fought on two fronts simultaneously. One front was visible to all: the giant construction of Nemours, where a palace was rising from mud and stone. The other was hidden behind the oak panels of courtrooms, but was far more brutal. While workers installed marble columns, lawyers exchanged venomous remarks. Every hammer blow on the construction site found its echo in the strike of a judge's gavel. In 1915, his cousin Pierre, a cold-blooded financier, stabbed Alfred in the back. He secretly bought up company stock, ousting Alfred from power. It was a betrayal. And Alfred, a man who did not forgive slights, challenged him in court. Nemours was built in an atmosphere of total war. The more pressure Alfred faced in the courtroom, the higher and grander he ordered the walls of his palace to be built. The mansion was no longer just a home for the woman he loved. It became his bastion, his final line of defense. If he lost the battle for the company, he would at least win the architectural war. His home would stand as an eternal reproach to the traitors, a monument to his unbending will. This atmosphere of paranoia and siege permeated the project itself. From the beginning, Nemours was designed as a fortress: a high fence, guarded gates, a private security staff. Alfred, exiled from the family council, was building his own court, his alternative empire, protected from a hostile world. He feared not so much robbers, but the intrigues of his many enemies. Every guest who entered the gates had to understand he was entering the territory of a sovereign monarch who lived by his own laws. The construction of Nemours and the lawsuit proceeded hand in hand, feeding off each other. Every humiliation in court was transformed into an additional ornament on the facade. Every treacherous word from his relatives became another acre of manicured garden. The palace grew from bitterness and rage, becoming ever more perfect and ever more isolated. Alfred Dupont waged his war using all the resources available to him: money, steel, stone, and the best lawyers in the country. He was building a fortress to protect himself from the outside world, but he failed to consider that the greatest threat to his peace was already inside him. It was the silence that was gradually consuming his world. Behind the magnificent Louis XVI's facade hid not a French aristocrat, but an American engineer. Alfred Pont may have admired the elegance of Versailles, but he only trusted machinery. Nemours was his masterpiece, not just as an architectural statement, but as an engineering marvel. It was a palace with the soul of a factory. He despised dependency. Therefore, his fortress had to be completely autonomous. Deep underground, hidden from view, beat its industrial heart, its own power plant, capable of lighting a small town, a complex filtration system that took water from a nearby stream and made it purer than any city's supply, enormous cold storage rooms, capable of preserving supplies for months of siege. This wasn't just a house, it was an ark, ready to survive any cataclysm, be it natural or economic. The 12-car garage, each with its own repair pit, was not a whim, but a temple to his passion for mechanics. It was an ultra-modern workshop disguised as an aristocratic stable. But the most ingenious and most poignant technology in Nemours was invisible. It was born not from a desire for comfort, but from a personal tragedy. The years spent in the deafening roar of gunpowder factories had taken Alfred's hearing. For him, the world was gradually sinking into silence, and this silence was his prison, his personal battlefield. He answered it, as always, with an engineering solution. Instead of bells and chimes he could no longer hear, he wired the entire house with a network connected to light panels. In every room, on the wall, hung an inconspicuous board with a row of light bulbs. Each bulb was linked to a specific room or entrance. If someone wanted to summon him, they pressed a button, and a silent signal would light up in Alfred's room. Red. The telephone was ringing. Green. A guest was at the front door. Yellow. His wife was calling from her bedroom. It was the nervous system of the house, connected directly to his fading senses. Nemours became more than just his fortress. It became an extension of his body, a machine for living, designed by a brilliant and broken man, desperately trying to maintain control over a world that was slipping away from him into silence. He created a perfect, autonomous universe, controlled by light. But to prove his absolute supremacy, he needed to subdue more than just mechanisms. He needed to subdue nature itself, and to do it with such ruthless precision that no one would be left with any doubt as to who was master. If the Nemours Palace was a fortress, then its gardens were a declaration of a worldview. Across 300 acres, Alfred Pont laid out his philosophy, using trees, water, and stone instead of words. And that philosophy was simple. Chaos must be subjected to order. Nature must be tamed by the will of man. This is not an English park with its romantic neglect and winding paths. This is a French garden, a triumph of geometry over the wild. There is no room for chance here. Every tree is planted to form a perfect line. Every hedge is trimmed with mathematical precision, transformed into a green wall. The pools are not ponds, but giant mirrors, reflecting the sky at the architect's command. This wasn't just landscape art. It was a statement of absolute power, the very power that had been taken from him in the boardroom. If he couldn't control the company, he would control every blade of grass on his land. If he couldn't impose his will on his cousins, he would impose it on thousands of plants. Every stone in this wall, every liter of water in this fountain was paid for with money earned from the most chaotic of human endeavors, war. Now, that money was creating a world of absolute, almost tyrannical order. At the center of this world is the Long Walk, an endless, perfectly straight vista, drawing the eye a half-mile into the distance. It's an architectural device that creates an illusion of infinity. Walking down this avenue, A guest was meant to feel not humility before nature, but awe at the ambition of its owner. It was a road to nowhere, and at the same time, a straight line symbolizing Dupont's own unbending path. And at the end of this path, as the crown of creation, stood the Temple of Love, an elegant pavilion dedicated to the goddess Diana. But this was no tribute to antiquity. It was the final chord in his symphony of control. Even love and beauty here were confined within the strict framework of classical architecture, placed at the end of a perfectly measured line. The gardens of Nemours were his answer to the world. He took wild, untamed American nature and forced it to speak with a French accent. He created a perfect, rational, completely predictable world. And at the center of this world, in his palace, he could finally feel safe. But while he was building his man-made paradise, time, the one resource that cannot be bought, began to work against him. The perfect gardens were ready. The palace was almost complete. But the main battle was still ahead. A race not against competitors, but against fate itself. At the Nemours construction site, a controlled chaos reigned, governed by an iron logic. The only thing that spiraled out of control was the money. The estimates, which had seemed enormous at first, were shattered one after another. The architects, with trepidation, brought Alfred new bills, expecting his wrath. But he just waved them away. For him, this had long ceased to be a matter of finance. Money was fuel, not the goal. Nemours was a monument, and one does not skimp on monuments. But while he spent millions with ease, another, far more formidable deficit appeared on the horizon. A deficit of time. At the center of this titanic construction, at the epicenter of this storm of stone, steel, and ambition, was a fragile figure. Alicia, the woman for whom, as the legend goes, this was all created. The woman whose love had cost him his family, but gave him a reason for a new battle. And this woman was ill. Her health was as fragile as the Sèvres porcelain that Dupont's agents were buying up in Europe. The doctors gave cautious prognoses, and the construction of Nemours, transformed from an act of revenge and a demonstration of power into a desperate race against time. Every day of delay was a day stolen from her. Every striking worker, every delay in the delivery of marble, all of it took away precious days she could have spent in her palace. Alfred, a man accustomed to controlling the world through calculations and commands, faced an enemy that could not be bribed or intimidated: human mortality. This newsreel footage, if it existed, would be unbearably poignant. The elegant, fashionably dressed, but deathly pale Alicia, walking through the construction site. She stands against a backdrop of giant scaffolding, amidst the clatter and shouts, small and frail, and all around her, by her husband's will, a giant stone shell is being erected, which was supposed to become her pearl, her sanctuary. But would it? Would she make it in time? This race gave the construction a feverish, almost frantic pace. He was building her a palace to protect her from a hostile world. But now he was rushing to finish before her own body betrayed her. He wanted to give her immortality in stone, but he desperately needed her to have at least a few years to live in it. Nemours is almost ready. The final touches, the most important ones, the ones that were supposed to announce his final victory to the world. Triumph must be seen from a distance. It must be blinding. It must silence even the most scathing critics. For Alfred Dupont, the final chord in his architectural symphony was the gates. Not just gates, but a gigantic work of art made of wrought iron, commissioned from the greatest master of his time, Samuel Yellin. These gates weighed several tons. They were not so much an entrance as a statement, impregnable as the walls of a medieval fortress and as delicate as lace. And at their peak, like the cherry on top of a multi-million-dollar cake, workers were installing the final element, a gilded sculpture. Its name, Glory. It was a gesture of such blatant, such undisguised pride that it bordered on a challenge to the gods themselves. He didn't just build a palace, he crowned it with his own triumph, cast in gold. Now, the whole world, approaching his estate, would see. A victor lives here. Nemours was complete, perfect, flawless, indestructible. Alfred had won his architectural war. He had built a monument that would outshine all his enemies. And it was at that very moment, at the hour of his greatest triumph, that a messenger arrived with news from another front, from the courtroom. The verdict was in. He had lost the case for control of the DuPont company. Finally and irrevocably. His cousin Pierre, quiet and methodical, had won. Alfred was exiled from the empire he considered his birthright. The unthinkable had happened. He stood at the golden gates of his personal Versailles, crowned with the sculpture Glory, and at that very moment, he was the greatest loser in his family's history. He had won the battle of stone and marble, but lost the war for power and money. The palace that was meant to be his throne room instantly became a monument to his exile. The fortress built for a victor became a luxurious prison for the vanquished. Every fountain, every fireplace, every column now screamed not of his glory, but of his defeat. He had built the most magnificent mausoleum for his own ambitions. He had lost the war, but he wasn't finished leaving his mark. If this was to be his kingdom in exile, then it would bear his name on every detail. When the wider world rejects you, you create your own, smaller one. And in this world, you are a god. After the crushing defeat in court, Alfred Dupont focused on the final, most intimate details of his palace. The final stage had begun, branding his territory. Throughout the house, like a secret code, like an obsession, the same monogram began to appear. The intertwined letters A and D, Alfred and Alicia. It was woven into the cast-iron lace of the balcony railings, declaring their union to anyone who looked at the facade. It was carved into the wooden panels in the library, where decisions concerning his new, independent empire were made. It adorned the doorknobs. Everyone who entered a room had to literally touch the symbol of their power. This was not mere decoration. It was an act of appropriation. He was turning the house into a personal possession, an extension of himself and his wife. Every object, from the silverware to the bed linens, bore their mark. It was a declaration. Everything you see belongs to us. We created this world for ourselves, to spite you. The AD monogram was everywhere, quiet, but insistent. It whispered from every corner. The laws here are different. Alfred and Alicia rule here. In a world that had exiled them, they had created a universe where their names were woven into the very fabric of reality. The house was ready. It was perfect. It gleamed with cleanliness and newness. Polished marble reflected the light. Antique furniture stood in its place, and the engineering systems worked flawlessly. It was frighteningly vast, frighteningly perfect. Finally, after years of struggle, construction, and litigation, the king and queen in exile could move into their castle. They had won. They had created their paradise. But, as is so often the case, paradise turned out to be nothing like they had imagined. Finally, moving day arrived. The day that should have been the pinnacle of their triumph. Alfred and Alicia crossed the threshold of their palace, but instead of the sound of fanfare, they were met with a deafening, echoing silence. They had won. Their home was flawless, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. The family, whose recognition he had so desperately sought with his architectural slap in the face, responded in the cruelest way possible, by ignoring them completely. Invitations to receptions and dinners never began to arrive. Their names were still crossed off guest lists. The newspapers, controlled by his enemies, continued their venomous attacks, painting him as an eccentric nouveau riche who had built a vulgar and tasteless palace. Nemours, conceived as the new power center of the Dupont clan, never became one. Instead, it became the most beautiful and most expensive golden cage in America. 105 rooms of perfect cold emptiness, a staff of 40 servants with no one to serve, endless enfilades of halls where the only sounds were the owner's footsteps echoing off the marble floors. They could dine in a hall that could seat 100 guests, but only the two of them sat at the table. They could walk through gardens designed for royal processions, but their only companions were the gardeners. The dream of triumph had turned into a nightmare of loneliness. The palace, built to humiliate his enemies, ended up isolating its owners from the entire world. Every evening, when hundreds of lights were lit, Nemours sparkled like a jewel cast into the darkness. But inside that radiance, there was no life. It was a monument not to glory, but to alienation. Alfred Dupont wanted to prove that he was better than his family. And in a way, he succeeded. He built himself a world so perfect and so exclusive that there was no room left for anyone else. He got his palace, but the price of that victory was far too high. He had lost his family. Life inside the golden cage flowed slowly, almost melancholically. Alicia, the queen of this empty kingdom, did not reign for long. For only 10 years did she breathe the air of her perfect gardens. In 1920, she died, and the palace, built in her honor, instantly became her mausoleum. For Alfred, Nemours lost its last shred of meaning. He became a ghost in his own home, wandering through halls filled with memories. The house that was meant to be the stage for their joint triumph was now just a giant tombstone for his love and his defeat. He rarely went up to the formal reception rooms anymore. His world became the basement. There, in his personal laboratory, surrounded by flasks and blueprints, almost completely deaf, he found solace in the one thing that never betrayed him: mechanics and engineering calculations. More and more often, he simply escaped. He escaped from the cold luxury of Delaware to the hot, wild landscape of Florida. There, on new land, with ferocious energy, he began to build a second empire of banking, land, and paper. He was proving to the world and to himself that he was still capable of winning. But Nemours remained his Achilles' heel, his unhealing wound. In 1921, he married for the third time. His choice was Jessie Ball, his secretary from Florida, a woman 20 years his junior. She became the new mistress of Nemours. She kept it alive, maintained order in the 105 rooms, and managed the staff of servants. But she was merely a custodian. The ghost of Alicia was a permanent resident of those walls. The palace had been built for her. Every detail was a reminder of her. Jessie could live in Nemours, but it never truly belonged to her. And so the years passed. The house monument, the house mausoleum, the house fortress. It stood in its perfect gardens, majestic and lonely. Its creator grew old. His second empire grew. And the family feud, the reason for all this splendor, did not subside. It merely smoldered, waiting for its moment. Alfred Dupont had lost the battle for the company. He had lost his beloved wife. But he had one last move to make. one final shot in this long war, and he was going to fire it from the grave. 1935. Alfred Dupont, a deaf, old lion, is dying. The war, it would seem, is over. But the most cunning commanders strike their decisive blow when the enemy is already celebrating victory. The final battle unfolded not on a battlefield, nor in a courtroom, but in the quiet office of a notary, where his last will and testament was read. The relatives gathered, children from his first marriage, nephews, cousins, all those who had waited for decades for their share of the immense fortune. They expected to hear figures that would make them even richer. They expected the carving up of an empire. Instead, they heard the loudest, most deafening shot in the history of the Dupont clan. Almost everything, virtually every cent of his fortune, estimated at $40 million, a colossal sum for the time, was not going to them. The money was transferred to a specially created charitable trust. The fund's purpose, prescribed with an iron hand in the will, was mockingly noble: to create and perpetually maintain a children's hospital for the treatment of crippled children in the state of Delaware, and also to help the elderly in need. A silence hung in the room, as heavy as a tombstone. The children, his direct heirs, received paltry, almost insulting sums. The family, the clan, the dynasty, all those who had rejected him, were written out. He didn't just deny them the money. He had done something far more ingenious. It was an act of posthumous revenge, brilliant in its cruelty. He took from them more than just millions. He took from them the right to forget his grudge. He forever bound the Dupont name to an act of the greatest philanthropy, born from his personal hatred for them. From now on, every time Alfred Dupont's generosity was mentioned, everyone would remember how he hated his family. He forced them to live forever in the shadow of his noble gesture, knowing that this gesture was the final middle finger he ever showed them. The fate of Nemours was also decided. The palace would remain with his widow, Jessie, for the rest of her days. And after that, it was to become part of this charitable machine, its headquarters, its eternal symbol. The children tried to contest the will. They screamed of madness, of injustice, but they lost. The old lion's will proved stronger than steel. His final shot had hit its mark. He lost every battle during his life, but he won the war for his legacy. He could never have imagined how long-lasting and of what nature that victory would be. Time is the most impartial judge. It grinds empires to dust and turns tragedies into legends. Most of the palaces of America's Gilded Age, those monuments to vanity, are long gone. Sold, demolished, remodeled. Their creators lost the battle against taxes, heirs, and oblivion. But Nemours survived. It stands today, as impeccable and arrogant as it was 100 years ago. And the reason for its survival is not the beauty of its architecture or the value of its antiques. It survived because it was protected not by stone, but by hatred, by an iron, vengeful will cast in the legal form of a testament. The palace, born of a family war, became the headquarters of a billion-dollar charitable empire, the Nemours Foundation. In the very same rooms where a lonely, deaf tycoon planned his revenge, decisions are now made about funding medical research and building new hospital wings. The power and money never went away. They simply changed their purpose. Nemours, built to prove superiority over his family, ultimately became its creator's most significant public legacy. It overshadowed all his business wars, all his financial victories and defeats. The irony of fate reached its zenith. The hospital, founded with Alfred's money, now treats children from all over the country, including, perhaps, the descendants of those branches of the Dupont family with whom he so fiercely feuded. We began with a question. Can an act born of the deepest hatred be considered a true good? Does a poisonous root devalue the beautiful flower that grows from it? Here, at the Memorial Carillon, where Alfred, his beloved Alicia, and the faithful Jessie rest under a single stone, the answer seems obvious. History is more complex than a moral fable. It doesn't divide motives into pure and dirty. It simply takes the energy of human passions, pride, anger, love, revenge, and transforms it into something new, unpredictable. In the end, the loudest sound that Nemours makes today is not the ringing of bells over its creator's grave. It's the quiet laughter of children in the hospital corridors, a perfect American tragedy where the greatest personal grievance, having passed through the crucible of time, gave birth to the greatest public good. And in this paradox, perhaps, lies its true, unintentional greatness. We see a monument built not of stone and marble, but of pure, unbending will, a fortress of pride designed to scream of one man's triumph over his enemies. But time, the greatest of alchemists, has transformed this monument to a private war into an engine of public healing. So where does a legacy truly reside? In the flawed, angry heart of its creator, or in the lives it unexpectedly touched long after that heart had turned to dust? The story of Nemours has no simple moral, and perhaps that is its greatest lesson. Now, this conversation is yours. Share your thoughts below, and if this story made you think, please support our channel so we can tell others.